Garrison City, fortified city in a time of danger. The oral history of Dover, New Hampshire, March 2020 to March 2022. I've collected the stories of the Garrison City in unprecedented danger, in that new normal for historical collection and future generations to better understand the time span of March 2020 to March 2022 as a member of the Dover community. The voices of those who have participated, although authentic and fastidious, they reverberate the idea that although time changes so much of our experiences remain the same. Dover is the Garrison City, a name rightly fitting, as it is fortified city of active, engaged, and thoughtful citizens. It is the essence and stories of what transpired in Dover that I wanted to capture. Was Dover truly a fortified city insulated by our deep history as a community built in preparation for the danger that was to come? The community that had already survived a pandemic, a flood, and several destructive fires appeared to be a safe haven. However, will the stories from this time tell us different? Mary Provincial Fogarty, a student at the Tufts University who was brought home from college in 2020 to complete her freshman year in the confines of her childhood home, wrote a story about meeting Priscilla, who had lived in her home previously. And I found this quote: "As for most people, the early days of the pandemic were more than just a little isolating. It was difficult to feel any sort of kinship with the larger community. Priscilla reminded me that we belonged to a much longer lineage of our town's history, one that would certainly survive a pandemic." In a film produced by the city of Dover in the late 80s and 90s, the film ends with the quote, "Dover has a long history of meeting challenges: wilderness survival, Indian fighting, wars, political strife, challenging economics, and of course growth. And over the years, all of these challenges have been met by people who care, people who invested in Dover, people who believe in the future." People like Declan Finn, who are the future of Dover. He wrote an essay for his application to Northeastern, and in it he spoke about his experience during the pandemic. "It was decided that every day at 6 p.m. we would all come together outside, social distancing 6 feet apart, to get out of the house and see people face to face." Mark Holt Shannon is an 8th grade English teacher at Dover Middle School, and he wrote a piece about being a man about Dover and his love affair with the city of Dover. "I fell in love every time I sat in that window seat. In love with my life, in love with the community, in love." Dover has a long history of struggles, as was the case for John Tuttle and his wife and child, who found their way here in 1638 when they were granted land by King Charles II. They had shipwrecked off the coast of Maine and walked through the wilderness to settle Tuttle Farm in Dover. In March of 2020, the United States was struggling with issues that have held commonplace in Dover before, and yet, in the current society, it all felt very new. Susie Jaggard, a single mother of one, had only moved to her house in Dover a few months before the pandemic, and she wrote a beautiful story about her experience being a new member of the community of Dover. In that piece, she wrote this: "Looking out on Pearl Street, I'm racking my brain to find some moral to this story, some narrative arc it should be following. A meaningful lesson, but I don't think there is one. Trauma doesn't care much for a narrative arc or whether we've learned a thing of value. It doesn't care if I'm a stronger person or a shell-shocked one, or if I'm one at all." Susie's story held similar notes to the uncertainty of trauma, as did Dr. Daniel Richards with the questions about his home in Dover. Our incredibly close-knit community changed during that time, or at least my experience changed, as has my perspective, worldview, relationships. I still appreciate Dover, but I don't feel the same. Our family started here. We had kids here. They made friends here. Roots started here. For this, I love it. Dave Sykes, the father of 2 boys, an independent business owner, holding up his end of the cottage industry so well known in New Hampshire, spoke about how he and his wife had always spent their anniversary at the New Hampshire Film Festival in Portsmouth. And because the film festival had been postponed that year, He needed to find a new solution to his celebration. It was definitely not the New Hampshire Film Festival. It was, in some ways, even better, because it was ours, because we made it out of nothing at a time when everyone needed just a little something. It was a labor of love, and it was pretty magical.
There's traditionally an invocation at the start of a commencement, so I just want to acknowledge that we are people of many different faith traditions and spiritualities, and we bring different understandings of the source of our life and its meaning. But we are very much together in this life. We are together in the daily joys of everyday living, but also in an extraordinary time that we will learn a great deal from. So I just want to invite us to breathe deeply together right now, if we could. A deep breath of gratitude that we are here in this extraordinary, beautiful moment. Let us never forget to acknowledge the endless blessings of our lives, of our families, our neighborhood, our children, our future. Thank you. There's
Casey Conley is a member of the House of Representatives representing Stratford County, and he had written a piece about the last time he had met in person in the House chamber. And he ended the piece saying this: "It wasn't until the House had finally returned to the Capitol and the House chamber earlier this month that I had really thought back on that time, which ended up being the last time everything was normal." And our city manager, Mike Joyle, had this to say: "At this point in time, it appears the most recent COVID infection surge is abating and life is returning to a new normal as we have adjusted to it throughout the pandemic." Yes, as we have adjusted to the life after normal. In these stories, I believe we found the essence of Dover, the real fortification of community. However, I too believe that, as the late poet and summer resident John Greenleaf Whittier said so famously, "When you want to smile, but you have to sigh. Rest if you must, but don't you quit." The residents of Dover have not quit. They are still diligently working on ways to support each other and to support the community, with soup kitchens, supply drives for Ukraine, with baseball gear swaps, and as my family recently benefited when our third or fourth time in COVID isolation happened, they stopped at our porch, leaving a fresh baguette and an offer to run to the basket. The market basket, if you don't know what that is. I used to think Hillary Clinton was right. It does take a village. However, the people in Dover know it takes a Garrison.